Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Opportunities for Australian Businesses in the Lithium Triangle. My name is Chris Gibbs-Stewart, CEO of Austmine, and I'm pleased to be hosting you for today's webinar. I'm joining you today from Gadigal country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which we all live and work, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Today's webinar will launch a new report commissioned by the Council on Australia-Latin American Relations called, the same thing as the webinar, Opportunities for Australian Businesses in the Lithium Triangle. The format will include a presentation by the author, Dr. Nicholas Lindsay, and then a panel discussion with both lithium and trade experts. I invite questions from the audience anytime during the webinar, and we will address them during the panel discussion. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. This webinar is also being recorded and will be shared with all attendees, as will the report which we are launching today. Next slide, please. We're very pleased to be partnering with the Council on Australia-Latin American Relations, or COALAR, on this webinar. COALAR is part of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and was established by the Australian government to strengthen economic, political, and social engagement between Latin America and Australia. The report was commissioned by COALAR and explores opportunities in the lithium-enriched Andean salars of Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. In commissioning this report, COALAR has recognized the important strategic links between the minerals industries in Latin America and Australia, including the important role that the met sector plays in sustainable mining, the mutual interest in critical minerals, and with Australia, Chile, and Argentina producing 83% of the world's lithium, the significant synergies and opportunities that can be derived through bilateral cooperation. Next slide, please. Today, in hosting the webinar, I'm actually wearing two hats, one as the CEO of Austmine, and I'm also proud to say that I'm a board member of COALAR. So I thought I'd spend a minute giving you some information about our important work. You can see our goals there, which are to raise the awareness of COALAR and the Australia-Latin America relationship, to strengthen commercial ties, to expand social and cultural connections, and to foster and promote general equality and women's leadership in Australia and Latin America. We do this through a focus on 5 priority areas, and one of those, as you can see, is mining, mets, and resources. One of the major things that we do is provide grants to projects that help us advance our goals. And we're pleased to say that our latest grant round received the highest number of applications ever, which is a very positive sign for the increasing interest in the region and the growing importance of the Australia-Latin America relationship. While our current grant round is now closed, another will open soon, so keep in touch for more details. Next slide, please. I also briefly wanted to introduce Austmine for those of you who might not know who we are. Austmine is the leading industry association of the Australian met sector. With over 760 members strong, our world-class members represent the entire mining value chain, and our purpose is to champion the Australian met sector to be the best in the world. Our links with Latin America are deep, as it is a key export and investment destination for our members, with almost 50% doing business in the region. As an organization, we've been working in Latin America for over 2 decades, and each year we run a number of major activities there. Next slide, please. In fact, 2025 will be a big year for us in Latin America as we are hosting the Australian Pavilion at Expomin in Santiago. We still have a number of exhibition booths left, and if you want more information, you can contact us through the QR code you can see on the screen. And later in 2025, we'll also be participating in Perumin and organizing a trade mission around that time. Next slide, please. I'd now like to introduce the author of the report and lithium expert, Dr. Nicholas Lindsay. Nick will provide an overview of the key findings of the study. Following his presentation, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to discuss doing business in the region and how to leverage current lithium opportunities. And I'll introduce you to the panelists following Nick's presentation. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nick for his presentation. Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good morning, good evening to everybody wherever you are in the world. Um, Today, I'm going to be talking about the Lithium Triangle. This presentation will follow a sequence. I'm going to spend a bit of time discussing the context of the lithium chemical industry so people sort of understand why and where the Lithium Triangle fits in to the lithium game. And I'm going to spend some time talking about lithium brine. This is important because most of the world's lithium and all of Australia's lithium is produced from hard rock. That's traditional mining. Whereas brine's different. Brine's water and requires different mentality, different thinking, and so on. I'm going to follow that up with a discussion of the supply chain and a little bit about exploration project management and the development process and production of brine. So we sort of get all the context and ideas that go with the lithium business. The primary production I'm referring to, all the little bits and pieces that have to come together to make a project work and a mine function economically. I'll be then spending some time talking about operator profiles, who's who in the zoo, and the sort of companies that really are in there now, still in there, and likely to become producers or are existing producers. And there are some important companies involved in this. Finally, towards the end of this presentation, I'll talk about the environment and society, sustainable policy, and this is a critical theme that underlines everything we do in this business. Without understanding how the impact of lithium brine production is on the environment and society, we just don't go anywhere. And finally, and not least, talking about the business opportunities. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right, and next slide, please. Here we go, lithium market. Right, you're probably all aware, but it's worth repeating that lithium is used in batteries, principally. A lot of people also probably not aware that it's also a major component of lubrication. It's used in medicine, glass, and if it's an essential component of nuclear reactors, water reactors at that. Its demand is steadily increasing, and we're talking about 14 to 20% year-on-year growth, despite the oversupply that we see at the moment, and despite the market being a little bit down, there is strong growth in this area. And of course, this has been driven by electric vehicles and stationary battery storage. As Chris mentioned, 2/3 of the world's lithium is produced from minerals, and the remainder is from brine. Now, of course, Australia is the biggest producer in the world on this, but that's from minerals. Brine comes from the Lithium Triangle. The distinction is very important because they employ different recovery methods. Mining, most of you are probably aware of how mining works. You dig in the ground and you process the minerals that are the ore that's produced. You produce a concentrate, and that is then converted and refined into the chemicals that we see today. Brine is recovered traditionally. It's been by evaporation, which is, of course, a very old, ancient technique, goes back thousands of years. Or more importantly, new techniques coming in as a response to environmental pressures, and direct lithium extraction is one of them. Next slide, please. So, looking at the market overall in terms of the supply chain, as mentioned, we have two main themes producing lines. We have the hard rock and we have the brine. It's important to remember they produce the same chemical at the end of the day. Lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide are the two main chemicals produced by these processes. Therefore, we're in the same market. So brine and hard rock need to be compared to each other. They are not separate markets. They may be a separate way of entering that market, but they're not separate markets. And at this stage, only the salar brines and the hard rock mineral operations are in commercial production. However, having said that, new sources are emerging. We talk about geothermal brines, and we look at Vulcan Energy in Germany and the Salton Sea projects in California as leaders in that area. We have oil field brines. This is brine that's mixed up with oil and gas production, and the oil majors are getting into the lithium game on the back of that. We have sedimentary formations and clays, which are generally fossil lakes or salars, in fact, where brine has been concentrated. Many of these projects are working towards production, some of them like the Vulcan operations commissioning, and they are competition for hard rock and salar brines. Another factor is brine operations tend to be integrated. What I mean by that is that the company that produces the brine out of the ground produces the chemical at the end of the day. Whereas hard rock operations can be integrated, like Greenbushes, for example, in Australia, or non-integrated, which is many of the junior operators will produce a concentrate and then they will sell it to a converter, mostly in China, but there are new converters coming along. Hard rock tends to use a brutal chemical process to convert the mineral concentrate into a chemical. And spodumene, which is the main product being produced in Australia, we're looking at calcination, roasting, acid leaching, and then a neutralization purification process. Brine is more simple. We concentrate through evaporation or direct lithium extraction. We produce a lithium chloride concentrate, which can then be carbonated with soda ash to produce a product. And that is the focus of the Lithium Triangle, which I'll now be talking about. Next slide, please. Okay, so why is the Lithium Triangle important and why is it unique? Well, of course, the triangle itself is just a geographical expression to simplify a few ideas. And the triangle you see there is a little bit different from the ones normally shown, but it's all the same. This encompasses the Andean salars of Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. Mustn't forget about Bolivia. Bolivia is not discussed further at the moment because it's not in commercial production, although the Bolivian government has done deals with the Chinese and Russians recently, and we might see them come on in the future at some stage. A few technical details about some definitions, if you like. Salars are basically deep basins. This is important to understand from the point of view of Australia. These are not pans, shallow lakes. These are very deep, up to 1,000 meters deep. And they're filled with sediment. And that sediment is saturated, semi-consolidated and is saturated with brine. The basins may have salt crusts and minor salt lakes, but the brine that we tap is deep in these basins. And the lithium, of course, is dissolved in the brine. The brine itself, let's decide we know what brine is. Brine's hypersaline water. And when I mean by hypersaline, it's very salty. If you consider that seawater is of the order of 30,000 parts per million dissolved solids or salt, brine's 10 times saltier than that. So we're talking 300,000, 100 to 300,000 parts per million dissolved salt. That's 30% salt. That's a lot of salt. That's been generated by the unique geography. We're talking about a mountainous area. It's very dry, extremely arid, high rates of evaporation from endless days of sunlight and wind, and closed basins, which means the groundwater is carrying the lithium, gets into these basins and it doesn't leave. And these things are hundreds of thousands of years old. And one project was that we dated some of the brine. It was 300,000 years old. The Andean salars, of course, as mentioned, are very important to the lithium market because Chile and Argentina alone produce 30% of the world's prime production. Australia, of course, produces half, the other 50%, and China produces the rest. But the Lithium Triangle still has half of the world's reserves. That means resources that can be economically exploited, and over 50% of the resources in brine, and that area alone. Next slide, please. All right, more information of why brine is important. In the market, as most people are aware, that lithium is pretty much on its uppers. It's not, the price is very low. We talk of unsustainable price at the moment. We're talking about dumping of lithium chemicals in the market. There's been there is some play going on which artificially is suppressing the price of lithium. So where does that get us? Well, because lithium extraction is recovered differently from mining, and this gets down to where the price curve is, we're talking about, to get lithium out, we pump and pipe the lithium to a plant for processing. And mining, they drill and blast and truck. So there's a first difference that you have to understand, which is a driver of price. Of cost, sorry. Brines have competitive advantage over hard rock lithium sources. An advantage which makes it, giving it a lead in times of low prices like we see today. We have a very low cost structure in the industry. And that's partly because it's a pump and pipe operation and a benign, simple refining process. Our projects tend to be integrated. So whoever produces the brine tends to also sell the source materials at the end of the day. We're well positioned in the Lithium Triangle brines to supply the US and European battery markets, and maintaining exposure to East Asia. Now, this is important for South America because you can ship east into Europe or up the east coast of the US, or you can ship west to Asia, the Asia Pacific region and California, because we have port access on Antofagasta on one side in Chile and Buenos Aires, Rosario in Argentina on the other side, and we can go either way. But probably the most important reason that the Lithium Triangle is going to be a long-term player in this market is we are the lowest cost producers. Because of the speciality of brine, which I've just discussed, you'll see this cost curve. This is a C3 cost curve, which means it incorporates all costs, including royalties. That little green arrow you see there is the price of lithium today. What that should tell you is that half of the world's lithium, maybe more, is being produced at uneconomical rates, unsustainable rates, and that can't keep going on. And the Lithium Triangle, because it is a low-cost producer, is well placed to take advantage of the price rises. We're well leveraged to a high price. Next slide, please. Right, now moving into the nitty-gritty of the services and of the METS business. This is a very busy slide, so I'm not going to go into detail with it. Most of you will be able to get the pack that comes with this this seminar and receive this information. But what I want to emphasize here is the development process and the number of bits and pieces, the wheels that go to make projects work, where METS, Australian METS in particular, because of your exposure to remote places and dry climates, are very well placed to take advantage of. Of course, there's the discovery process, and that's driven by geological methods. Brine being different, hydrology and geology is really important. Hydrology and hydrogeology is really important. We rely a lot on geophysics because we don't get a lot of exposure, exposure at surface. Remote sensing works really well because of the clays associated with salt crusts and so on. Typically in an exploration project, there's a target selection, there's discovery, there's the drilling out for resource development. It's a typical extractive industry operation: drill, analyze, and model to get a number at the end of the day. Modeling and assays, a little bit different from mining. We look at porosity and permeability and drainage, ability for brines to move through the structure of the sediments. We do a lot of laboratory and plant test work, just like other extractive industries, and we come up with a resource statement leading into a feasibility study. Again, this is pretty pro forma stuff for the consulting and engineers. Obviously, rather than moving trucks and having things that crush and grind and float, we're more involved in pumping, water movements, a lot of chemistry involved. And if we're using evaporation, there's a lot of studies on precipitation when you're using direct lithium extraction. There's a lot of studies on membranes and the activities of sorbents, different chemical resources. Construction, of course, and then production. Production, of course, is well field management. It's not mining. It's water business, pumping, looking at waste disposal, logistics, labor, accommodation, and so on. And underlying all of this throughout, from the beginning to the end, you have to consider the environment, what you're doing out there, what the impact of your activities are going to be, and develop management systems. And that starts right from target generation. Right out there, all the way through this, you have to look at society impacts. This is an area where there are few people living, sparsely separated populations. A lot of them have been there for thousands of years. They have a deep connection to the land. They are concerned when you start messing around with water. Brines are water. They have a rightful concern. They need to be reached out to. They need to be brought along. You need to develop a partnership with them. Governance, of course, is very, very important in the integrity of everything you do. Next slide, please. Okay, exploration and development. So we're moving on a bit in time. I'm not going to go into standard exploration techniques. I've covered most of this, the difference between brine and minerals. Geophysics and hydrology are the key elements to making this work. Test work. Up there you see direct lithium extraction modules and evaporation. Next slide, please. Development process, again, I've gone over this. This is something that people can have a look at the presentation for. Next slide, please. The lithium production, again, showing evaporation. Evaporation is different, takes years and months. Recoveries are very low, and it has a huge environmental footprint. We're looking at 10 to 15 square kilometers. Direct lithium extraction is nice, tidy, quick, hours to recover, high recoveries, and it's highly selective for lithium with a small environmental footprint. Next slide, please. Profiles, the big ones, Albemarle, SQM, Arcadium Lithium to be acquired by Rio Tinto, XR, which is the Chinese Canadian joint venture between Lithium Argentina and Ganfeng, and Eramet, which is now a French company, which is now commissioning direct lithium extraction in the triangle. Next slide, please. Here's more information. Another busy slide you'll be able to have a look at. It shows a variety of technologies being used. Evaporation, direct lithium extraction, different forms of direct lithium extraction. The emergence of non-traditional products like lithium phosphate and lithium chloride is also important to note. Next slide, please. Environment and society underpins everything we do. There are a lot of systems out there to help, but the companies can outsource a lot of the work that's being done in this area. But at the end of the day, the outcomes are important to own, and direct contact with communities and government officials is absolutely critical in this area. Next slide, please. Again, policy documents related to United Nations. Next slide, please. Okay, challenges and opportunities. Going quickly over this is what you're all here for. There are the physiographic challenges. We're talking about remote location, hyper-arid volcanic landscapes, high altitudes, extreme weather conditions, limited access and infrastructure, fragile ecosystems, sparsely distributed and sensitive communities. These are all have to be managed, and they're all areas of opportunity. There are the technology challenges. We have the specialized nature of exploration and hydrogeology, project development, construction, production, logistics, remote power grids, because we're not connected to any of the major power lines, so we have to generate our own power. And Australian companies are very good at supporting remote locations with power. Water supplies, we need better ways of finding water, exploiting and recovering water, and of course, communications. And then there are environmental social challenges. Again, extreme environment, fragile ecosystems, partnering with communities, corporate policy, sustainable programs. Communities are not just there We also have to deal with local councils who want to know what the benefits are going to be. We need to deal with regional governments, because they administer mining law and environmental laws, and they have their own compliance particulars that have to be managed and worked through. And it's very important we all understand these things. All of these areas are specialist areas, and Australian companies working from Australia have a lot of experience in them. Next, please. Next slide, please. There we go. Again, these are busy slides. I recommend you look at the pack and look at the detail. So, as I said, Australian METS businesses have a lot of experience in extractive industries, remote locations, working with First Peoples, working with sensitivities and communities, and I think is well placed to take up a lot of the opportunities. In the Lithium Triangle, which I spent a lot of time talking about that, and Brian, we're in it for the long term. It's going to be around a long time. It's worth putting the time and effort into getting in there, because this is an area that is going to develop and keep developing for the world battery industry. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Nick. Great presentation there, a lot of detail, and I know people will be looking forward to reading the report and finding out more. Again, this presentation, this webinar, the presentation and the report will be sent out to all attendees following the webinar. Now we are going to move to our panel, and we're very pleased to have a number of experts joining us today. So along with Nick, who will be available to answer questions, we're very pleased to have Ambassador Simon Twisk, the Australian Ambassador to Argentina, joining us. We also have Valeria Ortiz, well known to many. She is the Business Development Director, Green Economy for Austrade, based out of Santiago. And we're also very pleased to be joined by Claudio Martinez, the VP Copper Sector Growth for Worley. So welcome to all our panelists. It's great to have you here today. So I'm going to ask the first question to the ambassador. And my question is, Argentina has a relatively new president. How do you think his administration will improve the economic, social, and investment climate?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, I'm sure everyone's well aware of Javier Milei, the outsider, not from any of the established parties, who won the presidential elections in Argentina last year and then took office in December of last year. On the economic front, his government has prioritised the reduction of inflation. Argentina had been once again suffering from very high levels of inflation, most particularly in the last year. And also getting the budget into balance. And the government has been, I'd say, remarkably successful on both fronts. Inflation peaked around 25% just for the month. That's a monthly inflation, not an annual inflation, just for the month of December last year. And now it's come down to between 2 and 3% per month, which is still pretty high in world terms, but obviously a great improvement on where it was. And the government's looking to try to bring that back down further to below 2%. Similarly, on the budget front, they've also managed to run a budget surplus through this year, including after taking into account payment of interest. So say that seen a government that's been very successful in those limited terms, macroeconomic terms. In the course of that, they've also managed to stabilise the Argentinian exchange rate, which, after devaluing the currency by 55%, the official exchange rate, just after they came to office, they've effectively managed to, and then having a rolling devaluation of 2% a month since then, they've effectively been able to stabilise that by bringing the unofficial parallel market exchange rates to a point where now they're almost the same as that official rate. Now, on the other hand, it has to be emphasised that the policies that have enabled them to achieve that have also contributed to a fall in Argentina's GDP of about 3% this year compared with last year. And that last year itself was a contraction on the year before. So you can understand that the economy has borne a fairly severe cost to make those improvements on those macro indicators. And with that, we've also seen increasing levels of poverty, coming up to around 50% of the population, with absolute poverty also rising. Now, both of those, we do see some signs of recovery now, but certainly nothing that you would call a V-shape rebound recovery. We see the government is going to try to push on with this agenda. The question for foreign investors here or businesses looking to work here is how sustainable these improvements will be. And Argentina is going to go into midterm legislative elections in October next year, and whether or not the government can translate this sort of progress on the economy into a stronger political position will then obviously determine whether they are able to continue with their agenda out past this year and next year. The government's also been trying to make microeconomic reforms. Perhaps the first step that they made, which would be significant for businesses from outside, and indeed businesses operating in Argentina, was when they lifted import licensing restrictions, which had been imposed for some time by the previous government. And I think that's been a large benefit for the including for the mining companies operating. Last year, we had Australian mining companies here having to come through us to try to facilitate getting imports cleared into Argentina, or licenses issued so that they could bring imports in. But there's still a lot more that has to be done on the microeconomic front if Argentina is going to become competitive to bring costs down. The government obviously is aware of these things, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the key focus. On the other hand, one thing they have done to promote large-scale investments, including with an eye to the mining sector, is introduce a special incentive regime for large investments. That's investments of more than $200 million US, which give actually very generous tax concessions, both direct and indirect taxes, including import duties and VAT, as well as company tax. Also access to the exchange market. And finally, perhaps the most important aspect is access to external arbitration in case of disputes. On the other hand, what the government hasn't done is prioritise lifting the foreign exchange restrictions, which have been in place since before the previous government, since the last centre-right government actually was here and ran into economic headwinds and had to impose those. And those foreign restrictions on access to foreign exchange and restrictions on ability to remit earnings out of Argentina has probably been the single biggest disincentive to investment into Argentina. So it's a very complex picture. I wouldn't say that we have a clear view of where Argentina is headed, but there are certainly some grounds to think that Argentina could be a place to invest and to move for companies to look at moving into in the future, in the coming years. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador. A bit of a mixed story there, as you said, possibly good news on the horizon. So what I'd like to do is go to Claudio, an Australian metals company operating in the region, and Worley has been established in the region for a long time. Claudio, can you describe the nature of your business there in terms of what you're doing in the Lithium Triangle, and how are you seeing business conditions?
Thank you, Chris. First of all, thank you to Austmine and COALAR for doing this webinar and sponsoring the study, and congratulations to Dr. Lindsay for a very comprehensive and thorough report. Very good quality indeed. Going to your question, Chris, Worley is being involved in lithium. We started, I think, 1994 working for SQM. I've been ever since been working with them. We also worked with Albemarle doing the expansion for them, the EPCM in 2015. We also did all the stages for the Maricunga Salar in Chile at the time Lithium Power International, now owned by Codelco. In the Argentinian side, we have participated in many NI 43-101 studies or preliminary economic assessments as well. And we have also done a lot of construction work there. We did the expansion for Olaroz, now owned by Rio Tinto. We did the first and second stage for Galaxy Resources, now Rio Tinto as well. We are working with POSCO in their current project in southern Catamarca, and we are working with Rio Tinto for the Rincon project. We just completed the demonstration plant, and we supposedly start working on the big plant. All of this is done with probably 1,000 people working out of Chile, and we have the office in Argentina. Probably we are one of the major international engineering companies that has strong presence in Argentina. We have over 600 people working there. So we have a very thorough knowledge of building projects in both sides of the Andean Mountains, and very knowledgeable people.
That's great. It seems like plenty of opportunity for you, Claudia, over there, which is fantastic to hear. And business conditions, how are you finding them?
Sorry?
Business conditions, how are you finding them?
Well, as in Chile, the business conditions are well known. It's a mature market in that regard. Argentina, as the ambassador very clearly pointed out, it was a problem, the exchange rate and that sort of thing, but we expect that to be lifted soon and be easier to work there. The other thing that is also happening is that in Argentina, before there were a lot of junior companies doing lithium projects. Now the big players are coming into play, not only the likes of Rio Tinto and POSCO, we also have the Chinese Gansheng and Xijin also coming into play, and that brings a different attitude towards doing business. So we're very optimistic about the future in that regard.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Claudia. Actually, can I ask Simone, maybe stop sharing your presentation so everyone can see the panelists a bit more? That would be great. Thank you. Valeria, I'll go to you. You're based in Santiago. You see a lot of Australian METS companies come into the market looking at lithium opportunities. What advice would you give to Australian METS companies wanting to do business there, and what support services do you provide?
Well, the type of support that we provide are mainly market intelligence. We also facilitate connections with mining companies, and any type of advice that is not in our arena of expertise, we can refer to other legal or other experts. I guess the traditional landing pad for Australian METS coming into Latin America has been Chile, and followed by Peru. The number of Australian METS with presence in Chile is 120 approximately, and 36 compared to Argentina. It's different from the investment side because we see a lot of international companies and Australian companies and juniors working in Argentina, and that is a big push that probably will bring more Australian METS coming into that market. Engineering firms like Worley or Ausenco are also interesting players that we often give advice to Australian METS that work with them in Australia as a way to come into the market. Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Valeria. Nick, we might go to you. And also just a reminder to everyone in the audience to ask questions. You can do that through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So Nick, we know that the commodities market is very fluid. Things change very quickly. This report was completed at the end of June. Has anything changed since then, and what should people be aware of?
Yeah, as Claudio has mentioned, the big players are now moving in. There's been a lot of skepticism about brine production and so on. With Rio Tinto taking over Arcadian, which itself was a merger between Livent and Allkem, which itself was a merger between Galaxy and Orocobre, we now have Rio Tinto emerging as probably going to be the world's biggest lithium, well, not the world's biggest, obviously, a major player in lithium production out of Argentina. Orocobre is an operation in Olaroz. Livent, part of that Arcadium, is been operating for 25 years with direct lithium extraction, by the way. So we've got that big Rio Tinto push in there. We've got Codelco now setting up in Chile. We've got Eramet, which is a French company, now commissioning a large operation again in Argentina. So we're seeing some pretty substantial projects developing in that area now. And that's what's changed. It's when I wrote this thing, these things have accelerated. The Rio Tinto move was very important, and the Eramet move was very important.
Excellent. So they're seeing obviously great opportunities in the region, which is very exciting. I mean, you talked about it, you know, it's a long-term market. It's a low-cost producer, which we need with the price of lithium, of course. So that really sends a very positive signal about lithium production around the world.
Yeah. No, that's right. I see in comparison, I see lithium, Argentina and Chile lithium like the Andean copper deposits. They're big, they're low grade. They just keep grinding out copper year after year after year, and they'll always be around. And the brine lithiums will be that. There's a lot of small players in there. That's true. But they're all holding on to their properties. Nobody's running away because we see this as a long-term play, and we stay in for as long as we can.
Excellent. There is a question here that I think, Nick, I'll direct this to you. And I hope I read this correctly. Does brine from desalination of Artisan contain recoverable amounts of lithium salts?
Generally not, because those artisanal brines are near the surface, so they tend to be relatively clean. The salts the lithium salts tend to be a lot lower down. Yes, you could, but the grades are very, very low, so it's probably not worth it.
Okay, thank you for that, Nick. Ambassador, I'll go to you. You spoke about investment. We've just heard about all the investment that's happening in the market, which is certainly good news. From a Met's perspective, from a company wanting to export and sell their services and products into the Argentinian market, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, actually, I think Claudio is probably best placed to answer that because Worley obviously have that experience on the ground. But first of all, I'd note that these are international companies that are running these projects. And so obviously the Met's companies need to make those contacts with the owners of the projects. But then looking at the challenges of operating in Argentina, first of all, there are a lot of bureaucratic restrictions and other local restrictions on companies. And while the provincial and national governments are very welcoming to the mining companies, they're not as forward-thinking in terms of attracting international METS companies there. Indeed, all the provinces which welcome mining in the Lithium Triangle area, that's Salta, Catamarca, and Jujuy, all have some form of local content requirements. And at the national level as well, the RIGI, the investment rate, the incentive regime for large investments, also has local content requirements in there. Now, they may not be problematic at the end of the day, but it just does indicate where their focus is. So it is, I think, still challenging for an international METS company to operate into Argentina. And if you are operating here with the current foreign exchange restrictions, that means that if you're paid in country, you have restrictions on you being able to remit those earnings outside of the country. So what I assume is usually the case at this stage is that METS companies will contract with the project leader to receive at least part of the payment outside of Argentina in order to be able to return value. And so while the RIGI resolves this problem with the exchange restrictions for the mining company, it doesn't do anything for the METS companies. So that's a pretty mixed picture, but we can see that there are companies that have been successful. They obviously know what the secret is to that success, and that's why I say I think it'd be interesting to hear from Claudio on how Worley manages to make working in Argentina work, how they manage to get a return out of it. I do know of another leading Australian METS company which is based here, which has been here for a couple of decades, which has struggled with this problem of not being able to return value to the parent because of those exchange restrictions. But clearly there are ways around that.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you. So Claudio, we might go to you and address some of those issues that the ambassador raised, and also maybe think about how smaller METS companies might be able to work with you to enter the market.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as the ambassador quite rightly said, it wasn't easy, Argentina, to work on. Okay, let me put it to you. I'm not gonna give a soft pill on that one. It's getting better. The thing is, Worley has been in Argentina for close to 30 years, so it was a legacy company. So we were used to that. There are not many ways to get around that. So what we do is basically have external support that could be an expertise, but the bulk of the work is done in Argentina. That's the only way around that we have found. Most of the stuff is done in Argentina, and we just bring experts, be that from Australia or from Chile, and provide the technical input. That's the way it is done. It also gets tricky, as the ambassador mentioned, in the supply chain, because sometimes you need a special crystallizer, and sometimes Argentina doesn't allow you to import that, but it's coming around that. As Dr. Lindsay quite rightly said on his report, this is aside, once you evaporate the brine or you go to 3DLE, basically it's a water treatment plant to handle impurities, and then comes a chemical plant to produce the lithium carbonate or the lithium hydroxide, and that requires very specific equipment. So where I see METS coming into play from Australia, well, in the report from Dr. Lindsay is very clear. First of all, there is a big need for good hydrogeology. That's what the pumping brine is all about. And when you talk about DLE, you need not only pumping brine out, but also re-injecting it back, and how would affect that to the lithium concentration. So there's a lot of work there. Innovation in terms of new DLE ways to perform that. DLE is something that everybody's looking for. However, everybody that has gone that way has been postponing the startup of the DLE plant because not they all work as well as it was in the lab scale. So that's where Australia METS can help with innovation. I think those two areas are big important in terms of, we're already doing the part of helping the guys with project management, construction management. We got that covered with Worley there. Don't worry about it. But in terms of innovation, in terms of supply and hydrogeology, that's something that where METS can really help.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Claudia. Valeria, do you want to pick up on that theme and talk about the innovation that's needed in Chile and Argentina, whether it's from a lithium point of view or a general mining point of view, and what opportunities you see?
Well, there is a list of opportunities that Lindsay mentioned in the report, and probably one of the important ones, and where Australia is well known and has a lot of reputation, is in the environmental footprint and in the social space and on communities, and probably around that is going to be a long, interesting expertise coming from Australia. I'm probably complementing a little bit what Claudio and the ambassador said, that even when Latin America is, we speak the same language except from Brazil, having a partner in Argentina probably is key to enter in that market. So that even when there's a lot of Australian companies with presence in Chile, and they can leverage obviously the relationship they have with the engineering firms or large mining companies. It is very important to consider that having a partner from a business point of view in terms of how to deal culturally, I would say. So yeah, so, and just environmental and social is where I think Australia can give a lot.
Okay, great advice, Valeria, as usual. Now there is another question, and I'm going to throw this to the panel to see whoever can answer it. Can you comment on the royalty regime for lithium in Argentina? Is it the same as for hard rock minerals? Can anyone comment on that? Nick?
Yeah, it is. One of the differences between Argentina and Chile is Argentina treats lithium as another commodity on the same level as gold, copper, iron ore, that works. In Chile, there is a special legislation and special position for lithium, and the royalty regime is completely different. So in Argentina, you're looking at 3%, I think is the royalty rate, and that goes to the region.
It's being lifted to 5% by Salta.
Okay, 5%. It's been lifted, but it goes to the regional governments. But it's very different from Chile. But it's the same as copper and gold.
Right. And Nick,
I'm sorry,
sorry,
Chris,
go ahead.
if I may add, there's a big difference between Chile and Argentina, and probably Argentina will increase their production, lithium production, because of this more standard conditions. In Chile, lithium is treated totally different than it is treated copper, and it's much more difficult to have long-term investment, basically because the government doesn't give you a concession, it gives you a lease of the salar, okay? And depending on the selling price, they will charge you more, okay? And Argentina doesn't happen. So when the price goes up, Argentina will be benefited not so much as the Chilean producers.
Interesting. Very interesting there. Nick,
Can I just add?
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Just add that under the 1993, I think it is, mining investment law, a project could establish a sort of ceiling of tax that they would pay, and that didn't necessarily work well all the time. But the RIGI, this investment regime, also has that in what will be probably a more workable form. And that would include the royalties at the provincial level as well as national taxes. It was in the context of that the ceiling on the provincial royalty rate was lifted from 3 to 5%, which is what Salta then used to be able to lift that rate. But that fiscal stability clause is an important one to consider also in Argentina.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great. Nick, I just might ask you to comment a bit more about the ESG and the community side of things. It does form a section of the report, and it's quite important, as you said, and Valeria mentioned it as a key opportunity for Australian Mets. So if you could expand on some of those opportunities that you're seeing a bit more.
All right, okay, so when you're going into Argentina, into working with a project, one of the first things you need to do is talk to the people on the ground, the communities. And if you don't know who they are, find them, because they will always have an important role in the regulatory process. States, provinces like Salta and Jujuy, for example, and Catamarca, community sign-off is absolutely critical to getting any licensee, even to the point of putting the first drill hole down, right? So you need to get on the ground, start talking to communities, which means you need a plan, because they want to know who you are. You can use consultants, and it's a good idea to do so, because you need that depth of experience and you need the guidance. but you can't outsource your responsibilities to consultants. And people on the ground, they want to know who you are. They want to see your face. You know, they want to know, what are they going to get out? What are you going to do to protect their environment? So you need to have policy in place. You need to have a stakeholder analysis. You need to do a lot of background work even before you just turn up at the local truck stop and have a hamburger, because everybody wants to know who you are. You know, everybody's got stories about mining companies doing terrible things. You know, bad news travels fast. Good news people tend to hang on to. But generally, people are very supportive. The communities are supportive. If they can trust you, or you can develop a level of trust with them, you'll move. And the local governments and municipalities and the regional governments will take their cue from your relationship and how you work with the communities. So it goes right back to ESG. Develop a policy, a strategy for implementation, follow the guidelines. You're expected to follow the highest standards. People are pretty informed out there, I'll tell you. You know, they want to know that you're in compliant with international regimes. So there's a lot of work there in the background that needs to be done. And the expertise is not necessarily in Argentina, because they're working locally. There you've got to really get the full picture, the deep picture of what's going on. And that's before you even put your first drill hole down.
Okay, great, Nick, thank you. We have 2 minutes left. And so what I might do is ask each of the panelists about what is your top tip for a met sector company or an investor doing business in the region and with lithium. And Ambassador, I will start with you. Your top tip.
I think I would have to pick up on something I think that Valeria said, that if it's a new company coming in here, then I think they're going to need some local partner to help them navigate the environment here. But of course, if it's an established company working already, then they already have that. But certainly for a new entrant, I think getting to know the local conditions is quite difficult, and certainly be facilitated by a local partner.
Thank you very much. Claudio?
Yeah, first of all, my 2 tips. One is what Valeria and Nick was talking. ESG is very critical. It could doom the project if you don't get it right the first time. Okay. And you have to do it on site. I mean, if you're in Argentina, don't think you can do it out of Buenos Aires. You gotta be in Salta. You gotta be in Catamarca. That's where things happen. And if you go and talk to the governor of the Salta province, that's important. That's something you have to do, but that's not the solution. You gotta talk to the local community, because it's a very delicate environment. It is hyper arid, as Nick Lindsay mentioned in his report. That's one thing. And secondly, because I've seen this many years over, if you come to Chile or to Argentina, do trust Austrade. They know the business, they know the people, they know how to connect you, and they will guide you, and they will tell you. We exemplified this here in Chile. Said there's a difference between football and soccer. Soccer may be something you play in Australia. We call it football here, okay? And understand the difference. And Austrade knows the difference, and they can really guide you, and they're really helpful.
Excellent. Great segue to you, Valeria. Your top tip?
Thank you for those credentials, Claudio. My top tips would be that don't forget that this is a relationship-based region. So it's very important to build trust, to make connections, to be committed with the market, and think with a long-term strategy. So commitment and build relationships is very important to be successful.
Thank you. And we're just over the hour, but Nick, you have the last say on your top tip.
Well, I do. I'm with the others. It's all about local relationships. You're going in, bringing business, find a partner, mentor them, bring them through. That's the way you've got to do it, and use Austrade, because they're really your opening into the area if you're new in there. But you've got to go local, boots on the ground.
Perfect. Perfect. We're going to close things there. We are a little bit over time, but I think you will agree it's been a great discussion and some really important information through the report. And thank you, Nick, for providing that. I'd like to thank again Dr. Nicholas Lindsay, Ambassador Simon Twisk, Valeria Ortiz, and Claudia Martinez for sharing their expertise with us today. I'd also like to thank again COALAR for funding this important study. Everyone will receive a copy of the report, as well as the recording of this webinar today with the associated slides. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone who attended. We wish you a safe and happy holidays and look forward to welcoming you to another Austmine webinar in the new year. And also don't forget about Expo Min in Santiago. It'll be a great way to promote and make those connections that are so critical in the region. So thank you very much again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.